everything. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even something I wanted to admit to myself, but the way it happened, the way it felt, left me breathless and ashamed all at once. It wasn't just physical. It was slower, deeper, and far too much for me to handle. And yet, I couldn't pull away. That night, everything I believed about love, loyalty, and control started to unravel. I had always thought I was strong when it came to temptation. Married for over a decade, I told myself I was safe from the kinds of stories I'd only ever overheard or read about. Women giving in, men slipping away, marriages cracking under moments of weakness. But what I didn't realize was that temptation doesn't always come in loud, obvious ways. Sometimes, it creeps in slowly, quietly, through the smallest cracks you didn't even know existed. That evening had started out so ordinary. My husband was away for work, and I'd grown used to his late nights and long trips. We talked on the phone, but our conversations had grown shorter, less passionate, almost mechanical. I missed the feeling of being seen. I missed someone noticing the way I laughed, the way I looked when I walked into a room, the way I bit my lip when I was nervous. And then there was him. He wasn't supposed to matter. He was just around. A friend of a friend, someone who had been part of our circle for years, but lately, he'd been showing up more often. At first, I thought nothing of it. He'd help me carry groceries inside, fix the light bulb that was too high for me to reach, or make small jokes that made me laugh in ways I hadn't in a long time. But that night, when I opened the door and found him standing there, everything began to feel different. The way he looked at me wasn't casual. It was steady, unflinching. And for the first time in years, I felt that deep, dangerous spark in the pit of my stomach. He stepped inside, carrying the bag of takeout I hadn't even remembered asking for. "Figured you might not have eaten," he said casually, but his voice carried that undertone, gentle, attentive, the kind of tone that made me feel like I mattered. I smiled, a little too long, a little too wide. Why does it feel so good just to have someone think of me? We sat at the table, the food untouched for longer than it should have been, because we were too caught up in talking. He asked questions my husband never did anymore, about my day, about the book I'd left open on the counter, about the little details no one noticed. His eyes didn't just look at me, they lingered. At one point, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze locking onto mine. "You know," he said slowly, "you don't give yourself enough credit. You have this energy about you, like you light up a room and you don't even see it." The compliment hit deeper than I expected. My cheeks grew warm, my chest tightening, as if I'd been starved of oxygen. I should have laughed it off, deflected, said thank you politely, and changed the subject. But instead, I held a stare. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. That's when he leaned in just slightly, his voice dropping lower. "You feel it too, don't you?" I froze, because the truth was I did. I didn't answer him, not with words. My lips parted like I was about to speak, but nothing came. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was loaded, humming like a live wire stretched too tight. He pushed his chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor, and I swear it sounded louder than thunder in that moment. My pulse raced, my palms damp against the wood of the table. When he stood, I should have moved. I should have reminded myself of my vows, of the man whose ring still circled my finger. But I sat frozen as he came around to me, standing so close I could feel the warmth radiating off his body. He bent slightly, his breath brushing my ear. "If this is wrong," he whispered, "tell me to stop right now." My chest rose and fell unevenly. Every cell in my body screamed that this was wrong, so wrong. But my lips wouldn't form the word stop. Instead, I closed my eyes, a surrender he didn't need spoken aloud. The first touch was hesitant, almost careful. His hand grazed my shoulder, trailing down the length of my arm until his fingers laced with mine. The simple contact felt like a floodgate breaking open. When his other hand cupped my face, tilting it toward him, I knew the line had already been crossed. My breath caught as his lips hovered above mine, and then, slowly, deliberately, he closed the distance. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't rushed. It was slower, deeper, like he wanted me to feel every second of it. And God help me, I did. The kiss deepened, and with it, so did the weight pressing down on me. His lips moved against mine in a rhythm that felt intentional, Measured, unhurried, as though he wanted to etch every sensation into my memory. My hands trembled as they found their way to his chest. I should have pushed him away. That's what the rational part of me screamed for. But instead, my fingers curled into his shirt, pulling him closer when I knew I shouldn't. The world outside that room didn't exist anymore. There was no clock ticking, no husband waiting for me at home, no vows echoing in my mind, only the sound of our breathing, rough and uneven, blending together. He drew back just enough to look into my eyes. His gaze was steady, almost searching, as though he needed confirmation that I wasn't going to stop this. "Tell me if it's too much," he murmured, his thumb brushing across my cheek. Too much. It was everything. The closeness, the way his voice wrapped around me, the feeling of being wanted in a way that was patient yet consuming. It was overwhelming. But still, I didn't pull away. I leaned back into him, and his arms wrapped around me, pulling me against him with a strength that made me weak. His touch traveled slower now, deliberate, tracing the curve of my back like he was memorizing every line. And with every second that passed, the guilt that had been buried began clawing its way to the surface. Because while my body was surrendering, my mind whispered the truth I didn't want to face. This wasn't mine to take. This wasn't love. This was betrayal, unfolding one breath, one touch at a time. His lips trailed down the side of my neck, each kiss slower, heavier, like drops of fire searing into my skin. I gripped his shoulders, not to steady myself, but because I felt like I was falling into something I couldn't climb out of. He didn't rush. That was what made it unbearable. Every move, every touch, was measured, like he knew anticipation would break me faster than anything else. And he was right. I was unraveling. I whispered his name, barely audible, but he heard it. A low sound escaped his throat in response, hungry, yet restrained, and it shook me to the core. The deeper he went, the more suffocating it became. Not just the physical closeness, but the emotional weight pressing on me. It wasn't wild, it wasn't careless, it was deliberate. And that made it all the more dangerous. Because in that slowness, I felt things I didn't want to feel. It wasn't just desire. It was something that crept dangerously close to tenderness, and that terrified me more than anything. I wanted to cry out, to tell him to stop before I lost myself completely. But the words never came. My body betrayed me. My breaths came faster, uneven, while my thoughts screamed in chaos. And in that chaos, there was one truth I couldn't silence. I wasn't just cheating on my husband. I was betraying myself. My fingers tangled in the sheets as if holding on would somehow ground me, but nothing could anchor me in that moment. Every second stretched like an eternity, and with each one I felt myself slipping further from the woman I thought I was. He whispered things against my skin, words I can't even fully recall, because they blurred with the pounding in my chest. But the tone, God, the tone was enough. It wasn't rough or demanding. It was pleading, almost reverent, like I was something sacred. And that broke me, because no one, not even my husband, had ever touched me like that. The slower he went, the deeper it sank, the more unbearable it became. My body arched, desperate and ashamed, as if craving every piece of what I shouldn't have wanted. I bit my lip to keep from crying out, but the sound escaped anyway, raw and unfiltered. He pulled back slightly, eyes locking on mine, and that was the moment I almost shattered completely. There was no cruelty there, no smugness, just an intensity that told me he understood what this meant. That he knew I wasn't just crossing a line, I was burning it to ashes. I should have stopped him. I should have pushed him away. But instead, I closed the distance, my lips pressing into his as if I'd already surrendered. And in that surrender, guilt and desire clashed so violently inside me that I felt I might never be whole again. When it was finally over, silence filled the room like a heavy fog. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it suffocates. My chest rose and fell, still trying to catch his rhythm, while my mind spun in 1,000 directions at once. I rolled onto my side, pulling the sheet around me as though fabric could shield me from the truth of what I'd just done. He reached for me, fingers brushing my arm, and I flinched, not because I didn't want him, but because the reality of what I wanted scared me more than anything. For a moment, I thought he would leave without a word. But then, in the quietest voice, he said, "I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop." I turned to face him, And there it was again, that same raw honesty that made this impossible to dismiss as a mistake. This wasn't some meaningless impulse. This was deliberate. This was something we both allowed, something we chose. And that's when the guilt came crashing down. My husband's face flashed in my mind. His laugh, his loyalty, the way he always believed in me even when I doubted myself. What would he say if he knew? What would he become if he saw what I had just given away, so easily? I pressed my hands against my face, trying to smother the tears before they could fall. He whispered my name like it could fix something, but it only made it worse. Because the sound of it, spoken from his lips, made me want more, when I already had taken too much. I whispered back, almost choking on the words, we can't do this again. But even as I said it, my body betrayed me. Every nerve still hummed with the memory of him, every part of me aching in ways I had never known before. And deep down, beneath the shame, a darker truth lingered. I wasn't sure if I had the strength to keep my own promise. The next morning, I told myself it was over. I would bury it, lock it away, and never let it resurface. But the universe has a cruel way of testing the very boundaries you swear to protect. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already there, shirtless, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. My pulse spiked instantly, my mind screaming, don't look, don't remember, but my eyes betrayed me. They traced over him, recalling every detail of the night before. He smirked slightly, not in arrogance but in knowing. He could see the struggle painted all over me. It was as though he held a secret no one else in the world knew, one that bound us together in silence. Morning, he said casually, like we were just roommates sharing space. But his eyes, they burned. I muttered back a greeting, pretending to busy myself with pouring coffee. But the air between us was electric, charged with an unspoken desire we both were too afraid and too eager to acknowledge again. All day, I carried that tension. My husband's texts pinged on my phone, sweet little check-ins that made me feel like the worst kind of person alive. But every time my phone lit up, I caught him in the corner of my eye, watching me, testing me, tempting me without a single word. That night, I told myself I'd lock my bedroom door. I couldn't risk it happening again. I needed to protect my marriage, my sanity, everything I'd built. But as I lay in bed, restless and unable to quiet my mind, I heard it, the soft creak of floorboards in the hallway. My breath caught. The doorknob turned. And for a moment, I didn't know whether I was hoping it would stop or desperately wishing it wouldn't. The door opened, and in the dim light, I saw him step inside. My heart pounded, so hard I thought it would break through my chest. I wanted to tell him to leave, to stop this before it consumed everything I had, but the words never came. Instead, silence filled the room, heavy, dangerous, intoxicating. His presence was all I felt, all I could think about. My hands trembled under the sheets, torn between guilt and desire, between loyalty and the pull of something I had no strength to resist. When he finally reached me, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't careless. It was slower, deeper, overwhelming. Every part of me screamed that this was wrong, that I was destroying the very life I had promised to protect. Yet, at the same time, another part of me surrendered completely. And in that surrender, I knew something had shifted forever. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself it would end here, I knew the truth. Lines once crossed can never be erased. That night didn't just change my marriage. It changed me. It left me with a secret so heavy, I can barely look at myself in the mirror. A secret that whispers every time I see my husband smile, every time I hear his voice. Because while he still believes in the love we built, only I know the truth. Part of me is already lost, and I can never give it back.